agnostics, long-haired weirdos, short-haired weirdos, vandals, hooligans.
The government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government.
Welcome to The Politics Guys, a place for bipartisan, rational, and civil debate on American politics and policy. I'm Trey Orndorff, a political scientist at Oklahoma Christian University, and I'm joined by Jay Carson, a lawyer in Ohio. Jay, we don't often get to do the show together,
No, we don't.
so welcome to the show.
Yeah, my typical epithet is defender of freedom, as Mike likes to call me.
That
I'll let
is
it
true.
slide.
But, you know, I don't know. I mean, when it's the two of us, do you really get to be the defender of freedom?
Well, that's true. Where it's all freedom all the time here when it's the two of us. So yeah, this is a little unusual show.
Well, and yeah, that's one of the things we need to mention. So this week, Mike needed to have a little bit of time off. He's on a little bit of vacation, and so I'm stepping in for him today. And so that makes the show a little bit unusual in the sense that we don't have, you know, our kind of more traditional liberal foil in the form of either Ken or Mike. But of course, I'm a little bit of a chameleon. That's why I was teasing you a little bit there, Jay, right? So, you know, I'm a libertarian who has often caucused with the Republican Party. And so that's why, you know, every now and then I have to poke fun at your epithet because, you know, you guys talk about that and I'll think, but, you know, are Republicans really the freedom lovers all the time? So today I'm going to try to kind of put on my, take on my contrarian hat as we chat a little bit because, again, I get to kind of be on both those sides, which always kind of works out with students. They always think they can pigeonhole me, but it's really difficult sometimes, especially for individuals, to kind of pigeonhole a libertarian because we can in one instance seem really conservative and another one seem a little flaming like on the left. So, well, this week, Jay, we got a couple of really interesting stories, although, you know, it wasn't the world's busiest news week, but I think one of the bigger things we're going to tackle this week, we're going to take a look at the January 6th hearing. Already a lot is coming out of that, right? I mean, this week we've got stuff with the DOJ. We're going to talk about that. We're going to move on to talk about that infrastructure deal. This is something that just keeps kind of coming up in the show because, again, it continues to move forward. It's a big deal. We're also going to talk a little bit about the state of COVID with the Delta variant. And then if we have time, we got a few other little stories that we might get to, and we'll see about that when the time comes. But before we start in that first story, we start talking about the January 6th House Commission, we're going to take a brief break. Well, Jay, why don't you get us started and kind of get us up to speed on the January 6th commission and so far what's going on?
The January 6th committee met for the first time on Tuesday of this week, where it heard emotional testimony from numerous Capitol Police officers. They talked about how they fought hand-to-hand, inch by inch, as the events played out. The other, I guess, news that's coming out of that is the chairman has indicated his intention to seek to call members of Congress and subpoena members of Congress, if necessary, to testify as to communications that they may have had or may or may not have had with the executive branch, with President Trump, while events were unfolding. So, I guess this is something that most Republicans had opposed in the first place. Then there was the dust up as to who was going to be on the committee. Speaker Pelosi took what were, in her words, the unprecedented step of vetoing a couple Republicans who had been
Jim Jordan's bank. Yeah,
Jim Jordan, particularly, to serve on the committee. But nevertheless, we are moving forward with the committee, and I guess I wanted to get your thoughts on the first week and where this goes down the road.
Well, this is one we had, Ken and I had talked a little bit about this a week ago when we had done the show, and it's something I followed. But we were talking, obviously, nothing had happened yet. We were talking about the dust up that you were chatting about there. I was disappointed, and maybe I'm just going to be doomed to be continually disappointed in Republicans wanting to be against the commission, because again, for me, this just again plays in to a narrative that Republicans don't really want to understand what's going on. And I mean, again, picking Jim Jordan to be on the committee clearly was an attempt to kind of draw a line in the sand and say, look, we don't really care about this. And so for me, that kind of worries me. Now, Ken, he argued that, of course, that he thought having it being more partisan might end up having a potentially better commission when you look at it historically. I would have preferred for Republicans to get on board earlier on so that we could have had an actual commission, a bipartisan commission, instead of just a House committee. But, we are where we are. And so, this week we already have had some, I think one of the bigger ones to come out, although the emotional testimony is kind of a push and a drive. I mean, that's a narrative that is going to play well. I think the one that they're going to be a bigger deal, of course, was here on the 30th. The Justice Department officials released the transcript, the handwritten notes on the transcript, Donald Trump's call to press that the election was corrupt and leave the rest to him. And this is the kind of stuff that I think that a lot of Republicans didn't want to have to get involved in this go round. I think many of them probably knew this kind of stuff was out there, and that's why they weren't so hot about being part of this committee in a real way. What do you think?
I think you're right. Republicans certainly didn't want want to be a part of it, and I, to some extent, I argued that there were good reasons why they shouldn't be. One was, look, we've done this before. It was called impeachment, and that this is just sort of an attempt for the Democrats to keep Donald Trump alive. He is the best card they have to play right now, and will continue to do this. And I think there's something to be said.
Do you really think it's just a card, though? Like, I mean,
oh yeah.
I mean, January 6th, we actually had individuals, attempting to take over and interrupt an election. Is that just a card? I mean, that's I don't know.
Well, let's talk about that. I guess is were they really trying to take over the government? I don't think so. Maybe there were some, right? There were maybe some kooks who actually thought they could or would. I think the vast majority of these folks were protesters who were violent protesters. Certainly, they were rioters. They got out of hand. They should have. There should have been more police, more security there to contend with that. And those people should be arrested and charged and punished accordingly. But the Democratic narrative is that this was sort of some sort of attempted coup, which I just don't see. It's
so let me kind of push, because I'm curious about that. So I mean, it appears from my point of view that what moves the individuals from being just kind of pure, you might even call it, agitated protest, is to this next level. Is the fact that many of them think that they ought to stop Mike Pence from certifying the Electoral College. So if you're attempting to interfere with the normal processes of government, wouldn't that by definition be a fervent kind of revolutionary as pointless as it might be? I mean, I'm not suggesting that they could be successful, but
it's absolutely obstruction of public business. It's absolutely probably trespassing and a whole number of other crimes. It's not an overthrow of the government. I mean, in the law, there has to be the sort of, there's sort of two pieces of it that you can have the intent, right, to commit a certain crime, but still fail in attempting to commit that crime. And this is just, I think, one of those situations. And I think Republicans shouldn't run from January 6th or try to defend it, right, and say, look, this is as Trump had said, or these people or commentators had said, these were just tourists walking around. They were peaceful. They were nonsense. They were rioters. They were rioters. They were criminals, and again should be convicted and prosecuted and convicted in that order. But the idea that democracy somehow hung in the balance, no, it didn't. Even assuming that they had gotten in and stopped this or stopped the certification, certainly no court would have said that the election is somehow now goes to Trump. Well, they didn't vote. Trump won, just because that's simply not how it works. I mean, he had received President Biden had received the requisite electoral votes. Electoral College had voted. He's the president. I mean, that's just the way it is. So I guess that to me, so much of this is political theater. And that's not to say that what happened on January 6th wasn't terrible and horrific and we ought to take a look at it. But I guess my first criticism, a couple. One is that this narrative was that this was really an attempt to overthrow the government. And I'm not buying that. Again, it was certainly obstruction of government processes, obstruction of Congress. And look, the fact that of all these folks who have been arrested and charged, and many have pled, I don't believe any of them have been convicted of causing an insurrection or sedition or any of those sort of, or overthrow the government. It's been trespassing, disorderly conduct. It's been those more garden variety offenses, some of them up to felony offenses. So I guess that's where I'm coming on that. The second thing that I guess bugs me a little bit is I'm not sure exactly what the commission's purpose is, if not just, to inflame political passions. What is it that we're trying to find out that we didn't know? Now for example, the testimony that we heard earlier this week, while you're right, it certainly was emotional, it certainly was compelling, it tended to just add more heat than light, in as far as how this happened, why it happened. The subpoena thing I think is interesting. If there are in fact such communications, that would be a huge deal. I rather suspect that the communications that do exist are going to be not as shocking as Democrats are trying to make them out to be now. But the other piece I think that needs to be pointed out, and Republicans took all sorts of heat on this, but at some point, when there was the failure in the intelligence to know that this could happen, and a failure of management in making sure that the proper security forces were in place. The Capitol sees all sorts of protests, marches all the time. And in cases where they believe that there is a chance of violence or people breaking into the Capitol improperly, there are the barriers, there are the National Guards, there are the, Mike and I can tell you about a time we were, down for a protest march at the Capitol. And there were literally sort of these little mini tanks and again, National Guard type guys surrounding the Capitol. And this was a much smaller deal than what was going on January 6th. So, I mean, I think those are valid questions to answer. And
but you don't think that the committee is useful, though, even though those might be valid questions to pursue?
Well, if the committee is actually going to pursue those questions, and I guess that's what the jury's still out. My sense is that they will not, and things like Nancy Pelosi refusing to have certain members on the commission, that sort of kind of gives away the game, right?
Well, that's an interesting question then. So, because I'm a little bit curious about that on your front too. It's something that Ken and I have talked about, but of course the two of us haven't had a chance to talk about. But you kind of talk about that process. What are your feelings then on the Republicans who voted to not certify?
Oh, I mean, I think they were absolutely in the wrong. Mike and I have talked about this a bunch of times, and look, I don't think that there's. I guess, look, if there are some Republicans who could say, I have a good faith belief that there was actually some sort of chicanery in this state or that state, and therefore I cannot vote to certify.
Yeah, that's what I kind of thought you said.
I can appreciate that.
I think that's what you're going to say. Then why would it be surprising that ones particularly like Jordan and Banks, who were vehement in their kind of support and then did continue to vote no, might not be great choices to be on the committee? I mean, doesn't that potentially, even based on that logic there, make sense?
Well, no, because if the idea of the committee is to say we want a trustworthy, believable, bipartisan result panel that's really going to look at all the issues, then why wouldn't you include Jim Jordan?
Because he clearly was corrupt in his vote, and already on this particular issue clearly was biased. Otherwise, he wouldn't have voted as harmoniously as he did.
I guess if you want to have a legitimate, if the complaint is the system is rigged, okay, let's put it this way: if the complaint of the system is rigged, Democrats have rigged the system. And the national goal of this is to get to the bottom of what actually happened. Why? How were these people motivated to storm the Capitol? How did they get in? How did we miss the intelligence on this? Was the response adequate? Were there communications between the executive and Congress relating to this? Yeah, let's have that conversation. But the idea that, well, we're not going to allow any possible dissenters into that conversation, we're not going to allow them to ask questions. Well, that sort of tells you that the jury's rigged. If you have high confidence, and look, Democrats have a majority on the committee; they control the chairman. If you have a high degree of confidence on this, then certainly I think you let the other side in. It just speaks to having sort of a fixed fight. If you're going to say, well, look, we're going to have a completely impartial view at this and look at it from all sides, but not that side.
But is that really? I think it undermines credibility. Is there really a side that wants to ignore evidence? I mean, I guess my problem here, what I'm trying to push on a little bit, is to say that in my mind, there have been some Republicans now, because of the positions they've taken, they're not really on a side. I don't know what they are. And that's one of the things that's frustrating to me. So to continue to claim that the election, for example, is rigged, as many of you guys does, what that means is that they're not interested in evidence and there isn't a side, right? And so in your kind of terms there, you're talking about like, well, the jury is rigged. Well, if I was a lawyer, I would have, I wouldn't want these guys on my jury, right? Because they don't have, to the best of the extent that I can get at from what I'm looking at here, a guy like Jordan has just decided to disconnect himself entirely from reality. I don't know what a view that says, hey, look, I don't care what any of the courts have said. I don't care what any of the secretaries of state have said. I don't care what any of the audits have said. I know what I know, which is that this was fraud, and I just know it because... And to be honest, I'm not even quite sure what that evidence always is.
To me, that's all the more reason that you put somebody like Jim Jordan on there. Because look, if he's got, and you say, Mr. Jordan, if you want to subpoena witnesses, if you want to call some witnesses before the committee, let's hear them. If you don't have anybody to call, if you don't have anybody to back up what you're saying, well, at that point we can dismiss it. But no one can say you didn't get your chance. No one can say you didn't get the opportunity to make your point, or that you were excluded from this.
Maybe you, Jay Carson, say that, but I mean, the fact of the matter is that we still have cyber ninjas in Arizona going through all this, and people still think right? I guess what I'm asking though is at some point there's going to be a cohort of people who are apparently so disconnected from any kind of evidentiary standards that I don't think you very well. He might call, the pillow guy in.
Sure.
And we have hours of testimony on this, and the world says, yeah, see, I knew it, right? All of the dots connect.
Well, no, but don't you think when that is all, and again, this comes back to a debate Mike and I often have over the just sort of the faith in the people. Don't you think that at some point people will look at that and say, yeah, this is nuts, as the vast majority of folks have.
20
the more it's exposed. I mean, look, yeah, let's by all means, let's call the pillow guy. Look, if I'm Nancy Pelosi, he's one of my first witnesses, and maybe explain exactly how it is that. So that's
well, 2016 me might wanted to agree with you, Jay. I mean, 2016 me kept thinking, well, people are going to recognize that Trump isn't a conservative. They're going to recognize that, Trump does not fit what we are in the Republican Party. And then I was really worried when he got elected. I came out against him, but I continued to hope that there would be kind of this pushback. But, I wish that I was still 2016 Trey in that sense. But 2021 Trey says, well, if really those kinds of things would bring people to their senses, nobody by the time we got to the end of 4 years of Trump would have been taking any of that Trump stuff seriously, right?
Yeah.
But obviously they did. So I guess I wish that I could say, yes, Jay, I think you're right. If we just give these guys long enough airtime, they're eventually going to just discredit themselves. But now we're 4.5 years, well, more if you consider the election time of Trump. We're, let's say, 6 years into that, and it doesn't appear to me that additional crazy evidence. In other words, the pillow guy showing up, I don't think would do anything other than potentially kind of solidifying a lot of people's position rather than switching them to a more rational
that may be so. There's always going to be that core group out there who aren't going to change their mind. But I think if you interviewed, I don't know, and again, polling is difficult on these types of questions. Most Republicans, and again, there are so many different questions as to, do you believe the election was stolen? I do not believe the election was stolen. Do you believe there was fraud? Yes, I do, because there's always fraud in all sorts of elections. Was it of a magnitude to affect the result? No, of course not. Were there steps taken by various states or county board of elections that I find really troubling? Absolutely. That ought to be looked into. Again, do those invalidate the election? No. So, I mean, I think you can proceed both ways. That say, look, we have electoral issues. There are reasons to be concerned about some of the procedures and policies that happened in various states. At the same time, acknowledging it didn't change the result. That doesn't mean we don't look into potential trouble, because maybe it might be worse next time. But going back to this, I mean, the January 6th committee, while the election, the validity of the election is a tangential issue to it, that's not what the committee is there to determine. It's how did this happen? And I guess under your rationale, I mean, what committee could Jim Jordan serve on?
Well, to be frank, I mean, if I was in his district, my answer would be none. Once he's for me, I mean, of course, he's not my congressperson, so I don't get to make that determination. His district does. But if he was mine, my answer would be I would have to vote no for him every time, because I don't think he would be qualified.
Sure.
I think that disqualifies him from the public trust, and I would not be able to vote for an individual who had in the second instance continued to vote to not recognize the Electoral College vote.
And great, but there were millions of people who voted the other way.
That's true.
And what I mean, I guess that's where I'm coming from is, well, what's to be done with them?
Well, I mean, that's the fundamental problem. Something we might even deal with in the bonus. I mean, that one of the questions that I always thought was kind of profound. It's not one that I've explored as a scholar personally, but in graduate school, kind of set up, and one that I present to students is, is an election to overturn democracy democratic, right? It's kind of it's a classic conundrum. Yeah. And so, I mean, I think your answer is kind of playing into that, to the extent to saying, if there's lots of people who don't want to have a democratic republic anymore, and they're going to vote for people who are going to undo it, how does that fit into a worldview? I think that's a big question. So, I mean, I recognize those people exist. And that one of the reasons that I haven't wholesale abandoned the Republican Party is because I hope that we can shove those individuals out, right? We can either fix them or push them out. But I don't. My concern is that I think that what gives me heartburn on a continual basis is that I think really what's happening is they're succeeding in pushing maybe me, maybe you out, and that we don't really have that place anymore. And oftentimes I have worried, I've looked carefully and thought and considered and prayed about, do I really have a place in the Republican Party today? And more frequently, if I'm being really honest, the answer is that whatever space was available to me is quickly leaving. I don't think I'm winning that position. So I mean, I think you're right. There's millions of people disagree, and that gives me some heartburn for what I've considered to be my party.
Well, no, believe me, I feel the same on a lot of fronts. But I'm taking this from a bigger issue, not as a registered Republican or even I guess maybe more of a conservative. And I say this to Mike sometimes. It's, look, at some point you're either okay with self-government or you're not. And self-government necessarily means you got to deal with the crazies, and they get to have a voice, crazy as they are. And the whole idea of sort of the liberal democracy, Western vision, I guess, right, is that, look, if you allow everybody the freedom to speak, to operate, to argue, eventually you're gonna weed those crazies out. Not all the time. As Lincoln said, you can fool some of the people all the time, and some of the people all the time. But you get to the point where it's diminishing returns, right? You're just not going to have that massive movement. You're not always going to have a Trump to lead it. And look at what just happened in Texas, where the Trump candidate got beaten fairly convincingly in a Republican primary. So look, if a Trump supported candidate loses a Republican primary in Texas, I mean, you can start to say, well, maybe we have passed peak Trump at this point.
Well, yeah, I guess to get back to your question there, and then maybe we'll need to move forward. Excuse me. And then we're going to need to kind of move forward. And that is, though, you talk about in the liberal democratic way, is you've got to deal with the crazies. But my response to that is though I don't have to be, a democracy does not require that I set it up in such a way that I have to give them time. As a matter of fact, our system, one of the things that I argue with Ken about on a regular basis, we live in a democracy that purposefully attempts to have minority points heard, and as a result, to exclude particular kinds of crazy. I mean, I think that's one of the cool elements of the American system is we're a democracy with an asterisk. And again, I think that might be something we talk about. We're a republic in that sense. And the positive there is we have chance to not necessarily always give voice to the crazy. We don't have to. And so, going back to, who's going to be on the committee and moving forward, just because you have a position doesn't mean you get a spot on the committee. And it doesn't make me unhappy. And I don't think we violated democracy. to say, look, you have ventured out of the bounds of rationality. Sure, have that position, but we don't have to give you voice or position in positions of power.
So, but who would you have make that decision as to whether or not you have ventured too far? Should it be the leader of your own party, or should it be the leader of the opposition party?
Well, in our system,
let's just do a thought experiment. Let's say Republicans are in control, and we're doing a committee on violence associated with Black Lives Matter protests last summer. And Pelosi's Minority Leader Pelosi sends up AOC, oh gosh, who was the Congresswoman? The Get in Their Face, Maxine Waters. And the chairman says, no, we are not going to allow Maxine Waters on this committee. Wouldn't there very much be an outcry to say, listen, Maxine Waters may be crazy, but her party has selected her to be on this committee to discuss these issues. Let's have her perspective. And we may not like it, and we may think it's crazy, and we'll say it's crazy, and we'll point out in what ways it's crazy. And that's how it works. And then when we get to the end of the day and we release a report, she'll either sign on or most likely say, no, I can't sign on, and here's my crazy stuff. But regardless, no one can accuse this committee of not hearing all sides or saying we're only going to. What I'm saying is, if the idea is to find common ground, that's not the way to do it by excluding people.
You can't necessarily find common ground with individuals who don't want to find it. No. I'm not talking about finding common ground with Jim Jordan. I'm talking about finding common ground and just sending the message that, look, we had a process that was not. Again, I mean, don't you see the irony here of they're saying it's all fixed, it's all fixed, it's all fixed? Can we be on the committee? No. See, it's all fixed. That's sort of, to me, that's the best art. You're giving the crazies more power. Well, I mean, there's a lot to unpackage there, because one thing I do want to say, I mean, because you want to make that kind of comparison. One of the things that has bothered me, and you kind of hit on it, was this comparison between January 6th and the Black Lives Matter protest. I am so tired of Republicans hanging their hats on that like it makes one lick of sense.
No, I was offering it as the thought experiment of listen.
Well, I get that. And my problem with the thought experiment it doesn't have to be the Black Lives Matter protest. Let's say it is a I'll
come up with a different example. But a Republican-led committee. Let's say it's about Hunter Biden.
Okay.
We want to take a look at the the president's son's dealings with the Ukraine.
That's a great example. Versa. But what Democrat would be a comparison to Jim Jordan in that view? You think then, like, which of them has ignored, and voted basically against any kind of semblance of reality? And I'm more than willing to get on that.
I could, Chuck Schumer. I could think of any number of the Democrats who when the Hunter Biden thing came out, said this is Russian disinformation. Right? That was the official talking point, party line. This is Russian disinformation. That this whole laptop thing. So yeah, one of those guys. Right? I mean, the point is, if you want to convince people that the system is not fixed, by continuing, if again, the thing of, well, there's no such thing as cancel culture. Yes, there is. Shut up, you're canceled. I mean,
I hear what you're trying to say there, Jay, and I appreciate the point, but the idea that the Hunter Biden ongoing, the weirdness that went on with the laptop, and I find it hard that those individuals taking positions that I wouldn't call necessarily, to call Schumer's position on Hunter's laptop an equivalent to Jim Jordan voting to not certify. I feel like that's really just a way to try to normalize the Jim Jordan vote without effectively
one
backing
more.
him.
Let's go. We have a time machine, and we have traveled back to 2005, where they're investigating irregularities in the 2004 election. We have a number of Democrats, I believe Maxine Waters was among them, who voted not to certify George Bush's elections because of irregularities in Ohio, alleged irregularities, none of which
That's a better example.
Right?
That's a better example.
And Republicans control Congress, and we're having a hearing into this. Does Maxine Waters make the cut, or any of the other?
I think in that circumstance, you can make the case that she doesn't necessarily.
But again, do you think that committee has then more or less legitimacy and authority if her voice is, look, Black people are being excluded and we're discriminated against in this voting? Can I be on the committee? No. You understand the committee. The medium of the committee is the message, and that's my concern. And when Pelosi says no, we're only going to have the people on who I want to have on, that tells me that this committee is basically Pelosi's committee. They're not interested in any actual fact finding or truth telling or anything like that. If you had more people and you're willing to expose all these witnesses to actual cross examination, I think that goes farther, and I think it would be better for the country. But it's neither here nor there. The fact that, as Pelosi herself said, it's unprecedented, is sort of telling. But
well, now that's true. She did say that. Now, I will say, kind of as a coda here, I'll be curious to continue to see what else comes out. Again, yesterday we have the Donald Trump pressing Justice Department officials to effectively just call it all corrupt, so that, as in his words, he can take care of it. And I think those things will be interesting, but I don't think that's going to sway anybody, because if you have already decided that there's fraud, then that's just Trump doing what he ought to do. And I think for many Republicans, that's going to be where it is. But I know what we got to do here for a second, Ken, because we've gone long on this segment. We've got to pause for just a minute and have a word from our sponsors before we come back. We were worried that we wouldn't have enough things to talk about, but yet I think we're definitely going to. Now, another big item this week, and it's been an item for a while, has been the infrastructure deal. And this week we see McConnell coming on board with it. This is something that I know that both you and Mike have talked about, and Ken and I have talked about. So we seem to be coming into kind of the home plate. So what do you think about this?
So,
what's the setup for what's happened this week?
I would say we're maybe at second base at this point. But the bipartisan group of senators agreed to a roughly $1 trillion infrastructure package on Wednesday. Senate vote was 67-32. And the bill has include. I could go through all the everything. It's in a roughly $550 billion in spending, above what had been projected federal spending levels. 3.5. Whoops. Let me back that up. This has been a bipartisan group of senators been working towards the agreement for several months. But the big but is we still have to get, there still has to be some agreement from the House. And I think that's going to be more difficult to come by. So let me just run through a couple of the other highlights here. $66 billion for passenger and freight rail systems, $7.5 billion to build a national network of electric vehicle charging stations, $17 billion for ports, $25 billion for airport improvements, and roughly $50 billion to better equipped communities to withstand extreme weather events and cyber attacks. There's also money in there for broadband, clean drinking water, and $73 billion, which is a large number, investment in clean energy transmission. Anytime I see something billed as, it's an investment in, that's when the alarm bell should start going off. But that said, the next step is how do you pay for it? So roughly $200 billion of that money will be covered by sort of using funds that had already been set aside for COVID relief. The $49 billion would delay some Trump era Medicare rebates. And then there's some other money coming from sale of wireless spectrum space. But it's still it's a very big number.
Well, and to be clear, and this is one of the things that Ken and I had talked about, was that the spending does not offset. Excuse me, the revenue generation does not offset the spending.
Correct. Yeah, it never does.
Yeah.
So I guess, what are your thoughts? The position in the House has been that they will only accept this if they also are allowed to pass their $3.5 trillion changes, which include all sorts of things. I won't go through that laundry list.
Yeah, we're not even quite sure what that'll look like because it's not even finished.
What happens next?
Yeah. I guess to start with, one of the things that has grown increasingly problematic is that neither party is ever willing to pay the bill for the things that they want, right? And so on the one side, Republicans want to decrease government revenues for kind of stimulus purposes, but they never want to offset that. And then likewise, Democrats want to increase spending, but they don't want to then, once upon a time, that the old saying was, right, you have tax and spend Democrats. And right now, what you really have is you have spend and tax a little Democrats. They don't want to actually to bump taxes in the way that would be necessary or the other kinds of revenue generating to cover the bills for this. Now, in the past, this hasn't been as big of a deal, but I think it's a much bigger deal now because we are coming in a couple of years of historic spending. I've been pointing this out on the show repeatedly. Just a couple of the earlier stimulus packages were in their entirety larger than what we normally spend in an entire fiscal year. So the fact that we're continuing to have these spending packages, they're going to have ramifications. So even before you drill down into the details of what it could or isn't going to do, the thing that we do know that it's going to do is that it's going to increase inflationary trends, especially as the Fed continues to keep interest rates near zero, while simultaneously we have supply side production issues.
Amen to that.
And so those things all go together. And I think one of the problems, both for Republicans and for Democrats who've kind of come together on this bill, is they are thinking of this in terms of a normal year and not in terms of a year in which we have already spent via stimulus packages, again, more than we normally would have spent in a fiscal year. And therefore, I know, one of the things that Ken and Mike will argue is as well, the effects will be minimal. Well, my answer is that I'm not positive that the effects will be minimal because we've never quite had such a big year before, right? If we've noticed these kinds of, if we have historic precedent to suggest that this happened in the past, it's hard for me to think, well, a even larger one isn't going to have an effect in the current, especially again, we have other structural things going on that weren't the same, i.e. the Fed rate zero and these supply side issues. So at a macro level, that's the beginning salvo.
No, well, I think you and I are exactly on the same page on this. It used to be back during the Obama administration. There were serious qualms about getting close to the $1 trillion number because that was just struck people as crazy. You can't spend $1 trillion, and now we're dropping trillions right and left, and you've got another $3.5 trillion coming down the pike from what the House wants to do. So yeah, I absolutely believe this is going to be inflationary. Mike and I have something of a wager. He thinks inflation will still be at around the base 2% when it all evens out by December. I think that's nuts.
Well,
and
there is. I mean, just to be evidentiary on this, when you take a look at American workers' wage, and you take a look, and you separate out into the quintiles over this year, right? The bottom 25% have lost 0.9% due to inflation. The second quartile 2%, the third quartile 2%, top 25 2.4%, and overall at 1.9%. And so what you see as an average there is you're coming in at about 1.9% impact. And that's just right now.
Yeah. And there's also a whole lot of COVID spending it's still in the pipeline. It hasn't hit yet. Well,
there's about $1 trillion never always feeling all of the Fed's policies at that moment, right? So the Fed's buying policy, because they hold a larger number of assets than they ever have before. That's effectively just another way of spending that is not as obvious.
Yeah. And likewise, there used to be, or there have been over the past 20 years, some other structural pieces, mostly globalization, that reduced inflation or kept it at bay. And you're seeing less of that as there's more conflict with China and other places, and more that just globalization has caught up a lot of places, right? The savings that were once there or that were there 20 years ago might not be there now. So no, I think this is a really I'm not crazy about $1 trillion in spending. I'm even less crazy about 3.5. So, I guess, what do you think happens in the House, though? Does Nancy Pelosi have the votes to come up to do this without having it tied to the other spending bill?
I think yes, because I don't think there's much question on the Democratic side that they can get their own bill through. And so once you have this, you're going to have them together. There's really not a lot to be lost here. So, I wish I could say that I think that there's some big hurdles, but I don't think there's a major hurdle. And to be honest about the process, even if this does not move forward, it's not as if it's going to prevent Democrats from having it as part of reconciliation in just a simply larger bill a little bit down the line. So the only people who have anything short-term potentially to lose are Republicans, right? By signing on to this, they get to once again attach big spending bill, which has been positive for them. I mean, again, that's what they wanted to do when Trump was in office. Really, the heartburn is just about who's in control right now. And if you're Democrats, you either get a win for bipartisanship if Republicans get on, but if they don't, you still get the win for spending what you promised you were going to spend. So I don't see there being much in the way of a barrier to this coming down the pike.
You don't think the Progressive Caucus in the House will block this unless it is explicitly tied to a bigger spending bill, or unless the number on this goes up?
No, because they can put that number up higher in the reconciliation bill. I mean, so if you're Nancy Pelosi and you're talking with them, again, they get a huge win on bipartisanship. while simultaneously still getting to spend as much as they want on the second go round. So even if I'm, a dyed-in-the-wool far left progressive who wants to see massive spending increases, it's not as if this isn't the one and done bill. So no, I don't see that as being. As a matter of fact, if that was going to be the case, I think you would already be seeing the kind of the progressive caucus taking a position now. Now would be a perfect time to start signaling that to win yourself some potential points if you thought there was a chance to win points. And I think the fact that we don't see House members doing that right now is evidence that my thesis is correct.
Okay. Well, I disagree. We'll see how this plays out. But my sense is you're going to see progressives demand a fairly high price for a vote on this, whether that means it has to be tied to the anti-poverty bill. And again, the idea, of course, is that bill is not going to pass in the Senate, which means that infrastructure and this bill would both be dead, and we're moving into the summer recess, and then it's all essentially election year after that. So no, I don't know that Pelosi can get her ducks in a row to vote on this, and we'll wait and see, and I'll be surprised if she does. And so
we agree on the macro, but we very much disagree on on the policy play. I like that. That's fun. Now I am curious because it's been months ago now, Ken, but I remember we were on a three-way. We were having a show between you and me and Mike, and originally Kristen was supposed to be on it as well, and it just ended up being the three of us. And you kind of acquiesced that we're all Keynesians now, and Ken will continually remind me.
I think I said maybe we're all modern monetarists now.
Yeah. Which effectively is is Keynesian theory. Now I might be the only holdout left on this show, so I'm curious though. Are you taking that view? Are you still a modern? I mean, so do you think that that Keynesian policy still, or has this year brought you over to more the classical side?
Oh no!
With like a Hayekian view.
I'm very much still the classical view. I think in saying that, I wasn't saying that I had necessarily switch sides, but rather that was now the only side that left to be on, right?
Okay. I misunderstood you there. I thought we might have
I'm not saying no. I think that modern monetary policy is a great idea, or that it works. And I anticipate that I'll be proven right within the next year, right? My comment was more aimed to say that looks like that's the only game in town these days. So
I gotcha. Well, before we move on to our next story, Jay, we're going to need to take a quick break. Okay, so the last thing that we want to take on in the show today, Ken, because we're just going to run out of time. We're going to have to put more things into the bonus show. That's the way it is. We wanted to talk a little bit about kind of the current state of COVID, the Delta variant, and of course this week, Biden suggesting $100 payments for the unvaccinated to get vaccinated. And so I was just kind of curious what you kind of saw briefly on that front.
So briefly, and again, this was sort of a big topic, and you and I kicked it around. There's like a lot of little things to talk about, right?
Oh yeah.
And rather than one big one, I would say in the news, there's some evidence that vaccinations have ticked up in the South, in the Midwest, following sort of this the spread of the Delta variant. Now, whether that is because of people who are more concerned about it now, or they're getting pressure from friends and family, or they have just finally given up whatever objections that they may have had, it's unclear, because these things are hard to track. It's not as like everybody's getting pulled when they get the shot of, why are you doing this now? The Biden $100 thing. I think we should talk about that just because on the one hand it's kind of hilarious. You were on the sort of a chain email. Mike texted about the $100 and his thought
in our
on,
Slack channel. Yeah.
Yeah, shouldn't people who were the early adopters get paid more? And obviously that's the case, but it's sort of there's there's sort of a this is just sort of a truism in the law. If you're in a case with multiple claimants, multiple defendants, or multiple claimants, the last guy to settle always gets the best deal. If it's $100 now, whoever is the last guy to get vaccinated, could be looking at a big payday. I think the $100 is sort of silly. I mean, the lottery idea was perhaps marginally less silly. But look,
you explain, in Ohio, for example, if you were vaccinated, you put your vax card in, and then you could have been drawn a winner. And whenever you had done it, as long as you've been vaccinated.
Exactly. Yeah. So it applied to all vaccinated people. So there was that sort of not the creating the perverse incentive of I'm going to hold out and not get vaccinated for a better deal. And also it was one of those, hey, maybe I'll win $1 million, as opposed to, hey, here's $100 cash. Because what troubles me about the Biden proposal is, I'm not sure if that does it. If all these folks who weren't getting vaccinated, if the only difference is $100, yikes. I mean, my sense is, look, if you are really a serious anti-vaxxer and believe, this has dangerous side effects, or there's the Bill Gates microchip, or whatever, right? $100 isn't going to change your mind. Likewise, if you're priced to if you do believe this and you're willing to sell out for $100, well, I don't know. I guess that says something about you. I don't know. What are your thoughts? I mean, to me, it just strikes me more as just kind of like throwing money out of a plane kind of thing.
I'm sympathetic to the Biden administration on this because you're in this horrible circumstance where we haven't yet reached enough vaccinations, and especially in particular locations. And I'll say this, in Oklahoma, we're under the average relatively significantly. And that's in part due to things that are outside the control of the administration, right? I mean, we are in a federal system. Each state gets to have their own deal. So in Texas, in Oklahoma, in Arkansas, we have a bunch of policies that have actually made all of this much, much harder.
Such as? So,
for example, in Oklahoma, we have an executive order that you can't require masks in any public venue or location that is controlled by the state. So that includes like my neighbor here to the north at Oklahoma State University. So they can't require vaccinations. They can't ask for vaccination status, and they aren't allowed to have masks. And so that creates kind of difficult environments for families coming back. It also puts other schools. So I work at Oklahoma Christian, so we're private, so we don't fall under that executive order. But it's put us under a unique amount of pressure here, in that there's been a number of, as a matter of fact, it gets a little tiresome, the complaints. So we're going to have vaccinations possible on campus, and we'll have slightly different rules for people who aren't vaccinated from than who are. Now, we can only do that, though, because, now, if the legislature passes the law the way that they want to do, in other words, codifying what the governor has done and therefore extending it, then we wouldn't be able to do that either. And that's just yet another barrier to people getting vaccines. And
is it a barrier? I mean, I guess that's my, as you're a libertarian. I mean, is lack of government coercion a barrier for
in this case, this would be government coercion against vaccines is the best that I can see it. I mean, non-coercion would be to say.
But the government. But what I'm saying is, if the government saying
private institutions are forced to not make the policies as they see best fit, because because they don't want to have some anti-vaxxer, their feelings hurt. That's coercion against a private institution.
Okay, I mean, fair enough. But is your sense that if the private institutions could coerce people, then you'd have? I guess do you think the problem in Oklahoma is not enough private institutions are coercing people?
In other words, do you think that in other words, I want to make sure I'm answering your question correctly. If more institutions could do what they would want to do, would that increase vaccination rates in a statistically significant way?
Yeah.
I would say my guess would be probably yes, but not as much in Oklahoma because, again, there's probably not as many private institutions who'd want to do that, which, again, would be their prerogative.
Right, yeah. That's kind of because again, I mean, where I live, and we're sitting pretty at I don't know what our county vaccination level, but it's probably 60-70%.
I see. Here we are about 40.
Yeah. But this was all. I mean, people got vaccinated voluntarily, and nobody was coercing anybody to do it.
But if you think about it, though, that kind of private coercion, we use that on kind of a regular basis for all kinds of social things. I mean, as a matter of fact, to come live in dorms, there are a number of vaccinations that are required.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And, we don't have laws that prevent schools from doing that. So it seems really bizarre to me that we have bifurcated here and say, well, we're going to let you, for all kinds of safety reasons, mandate that you have to have your hepatitis shot. And that's not the big one. The one in dorms is, meningitis.
Yeah.
Your meningitis shot. But we're definitely going to have executive orders and laws. We're going to protect your freedom from COVID. I can't quite figure that out. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
No, and I think there's a lot of political theater going on there on both sides. And I guess that's my question is it your sense that people in Oklahoma and states like Oklahoma aren't getting vaccinated because they aren't being forced to do it?
Because they've been consistently lied to. They're not. I mean, my suggestion is that I don't think that those kinds of incentives the White House is proposing are going to be effective, and I think you agree on that.
Yeah.
In large part because of the amount of misinformation that it has come forward, oftentimes from elected officials in the respective states. About the COVID vaccine and its danger or its harm to freedom in some way. And so in large part, I blame a lot of the hesitancy on that of particular political actors who have found it in their interest to pretend that this isn't an issue or worse.
Well, let's name names then, I guess, because I'm like, who is making the argument? Political leaders that people shouldn't get vaccinated.
Well, I mean, take a look in the case of Oklahoma. We have a number of state House and Senate members who have made that case forthrightly. Likewise, in Arkansas. Now, I can't speak to Texas or every other state, right? I don't keep up with every single state legislature. I don't know that much time. But I would suggest that those kinds of structural factors are one of the reasons we have southern states with the numbers that they do. I mean, because we know as social scientists that often structural institutional arrangements are one of the biggest predictors of outcome. And so when you set up laws and systems that suggest that the vaccine is bad, right? So if you have a law that says, okay, you can't have masks, you can't differentiate. What you're suggesting is there's something wrong with that vaccine. It's part of an institutional framework in your state, and that's going to discourage people from taking those steps. And instead, what we ought to be doing is having kind of it's called the nudge theory, if you will, in social science, creating institutions where it's frictionless to do the right thing, right? You're not forcing anybody to do it, but you want to make it as frictionless as possible. And instead, not only are we not making it frictionless, we're creating institutional barriers by in the institution itself, both creating friction and sowing doubt.
Two things. I guess I still don't get where the friction is, right? Because still anyone in Oklahoma, Arkansas, Texas, wherever can walk into a CVS or wherever and get a vaccine for free.
So, but if you're Governor Stitt, governor of Oklahoma, Governor Abbott, governor of Texas, and you have released executive orders that suggest that nobody can ask about this, and that you've had press conferences now saying to that effect that we're not going to do this because we don't want to force people. Don't you think that is a message to people to say, well, okay, well, fine. I could go down and make an appointment at the CVS to do this thing, but no one's going to ever know. It won't impact any bit of my life. So I'm not going to do it, especially since, why else would if he's doing this, there must be a reason why.
See, I get that goes to my second point. And I tend to think that politicians follow people a lot more than people follow politicians. And Mike and I have this argument all the time, where he says, well, people do this because Trump said X. I think it's quite the other way around. I think it's politicians do X because they hear from the people that this is what they want. Now, right or wrong, right? The people can certainly be misled or not have terribly good ideas, and that's where leadership comes in. Is if you are a skilled leader, you're able to talk to those folks and move them in a more productive direction. But there is always this sense, and I think this is what's happened in a lot of states. And Ohio's had some of this, not to the extent a lot of other Midwestern or southern states of pushback against COVID measures and mask mandates and vaccine mandates, that sort of thing. But I think it's comes up from. Look, that's what these elected representatives, that's what their constituents are asking and demanding. And again, the constituents can be, batshit crazy. But nevertheless, if we're talking about government by the people, that's where it's coming from. I don't think this is, and I don't think if whatever a state senator said, look, I'm not going to do this. I think the people would just find a new state senator rather than the state senator finding new people.
Well, I would suggest, I understand where you're coming from, but I would suggest that the data is such that you might be underestimating slightly the impact of elite signaling. Now, that's not to say that you're wrong. I think obviously the model suggests that, of course, you couldn't just be anything, right? It's got to come out as a Nazi or something. So, of course, there's kind of a push and pull between elite behavior and public behavior in the political system. And usually how it comes out is through pattern behavior, i.e. institutional design. And all I'm trying to argue is that when you create institutional creation has real world ramifications on human behavior, often more profoundly, I think, than many people want to recognize. I think the kind of the default assumption is most people are kind of autonomous individuals running around, and they make all of their choices independent from the structures in which they exist. And rather, I think a more realistic model of this, and when you take a look at the data, is that you kind of have these patterning institutions. And so people are, of course, making choices. So I'm not attempting to, I believe individuals can do that. But we're patterned, and we make many of our choices unconsciously as a result of those institutional structures. And so, for example, one of the ones I always use in my classes is the way a student behaves in a class has very little to do with probably their way of thinking or they're making a choice, but rather a lot to do with the institutional structure. So on the first day, students come in, They come to me, they accept a syllabus, they only talk when they raise their hand, blah, blah. There's all these things that you do in that classroom setting. That's all about pattern institutionalized behavior. So, if we patterned it different, people would have, by default, behaved slightly differently on aggregate. And so I think for COVID, we're seeing that happen in the case of vaccination rates, where we have institutional patterns where it is, like in your county, for example, where you don't see the same kinds of barriers being put up. You have a much higher vaccination rate, and that doesn't shock me. And then in counties like my own, in Oklahoma, where we see a lower. I don't think that Oklahomans are dumber than Ohioans. Rather, I think it's these institutional patterns that kind of change those base rates.
Do you think Oklahomans are more distrustful of authority than Ohioans?
Since I don't have any data on it, I don't really know how to answer that, Jay.
Yeah, I mean, because to me, I look at it, this is more of it's less institutions. Institutions reflect the cultures from which they're, and I would have to think that all the elite institutions, wherever, right, all the hospitals, the universities, the doctors, the professional organizations, churches, everybody has been saying, get the vaccine. Right. So the anti-vaxxer.
Now, I will say, I will go to the extent you mentioned, like, for example, churches, and that's something near and dear to my heart. That is not the case universally at churches. As a matter of fact, there is a big church in Tulsa that early on came out against vaccine. We've had a couple, locally here. So, even in that view, there may not be quite the same institutional push.
Okay. That's interesting, because again, that's been very much the opposite of what I've seen here in Northeast Ohio. But that kind of goes to my point, is that maybe this again, it's Mike and I always talk about Edmund Burke, and it's cultural stuff matters, right? And to me that drives so much more than say institutions.
Okay, so we would probably have some space there then. I believe that culture matters, but 10 years of studying it have left me with that suggests that the data that those institutional structures are far more important than we often want to give them credit for.
So no, got it. And look, and I would agree with you when it comes to things like tax policy or something like that, right? Creating economic incentives that you create these structures, and then people just sort of fall into them, fit into them, because that's they make their decisions based on how the government structure that exists rewards or punishes them. But and maybe if we're coming to a point of agreement here, the difference on this is that COVID is something that is so new and so different. It doesn't really fit into the boxes of what we would usually talk about in these kind of things, right?
Maybe.
I'm just throwing that out there.
I hear you, but I mean,
it's much more
we've already gone long on the show,
kind of thing, and the newness of it and all that.
I'm often, as a scientist, it is always my kind of assumption that what is happening new will, if I have explained behavior in the past rightly, will be explained by those same mechanisms moving forward. Because if my theories can't predict what's happening in the future, then they're kind of pathetic theories. And again, I mean, as the show kind of gets on, I mean, earlier, we had brought up like Black Lives Matter, but I think that's like another great example of the importance of institutional structures, is the kinds of ways that African Americans have faced things that others have not, in part because not there was individual people trying to be racist, but rather you have racist institutional structures. But I think that's probably more than a topic to take on. And
yeah, that's another show.
So why don't we pause here, Jay? And we're gonna have to put everything else in the bonus show. So if you want the rest, you'll have to come tune into the bonus show. It's been a lot of fun doing it with you. Hope you had fun too.
Yep. Absolutely.
Well, I want to thank
to when we get to you and I again sometime.
Well, yeah, I think at some point maybe we'll have to do the what to get Chris. I've never been on a show with Kristen, so at some point maybe we'll have to make that happen as well. Get the three of us. I think that would. I was looking forward to that a long time ago, but we'll get there. Well, I want to thank everybody for listening to the Politics Guys. I want you to know that for Jay and for myself and for Mike and for Kristen and for Ken, we don't do this because it's some great side gig. We do this because we love doing the show and we think that this is interesting, worthwhile, and useful. But to make it happen, there's things that are required. The microphones we talk into and the software that's a monthly fee and the list just goes on. And the way that you can make those kinds of tools available to us is by doing things like subscribing to the Politics Guys on the podcast app of choice, sharing episodes like this one, which are especially kind of unique, where you got myself and Jay. As a matter of fact, those kinds of behaviors, that's one of the best ways to increase the visibility of the show, and we really appreciate that. But we also just need your outright support. And you get things for being a supporter other than just the good feeling of knowing that you're making it possible for us to continue to do the show. You get access to exclusive supporters-only content. And one of those items, of course, is our supporters-only Wednesday show. And Jay and I are going to be recording that in just a minute. We're going to be taking on a bunch of listener questions. We also have a Discord channel. So if you want to chat with myself, Jay, you can get on Discord once you become a supporter. So we have all kinds of cool, different levels of support, different things that unlocks. And so if you want to learn about the nitty-gritty details of that, if you're ready to become a supporter or just want to check out more of the benefits of being a supporter for the Politics Guys, you can head to our Patreon page at patreon.com/politicsguys, or you can go to our main page, politicsguys.com/support. So again, join myself and Jay again on Wednesday, which is going to be a lot of fun, by heading to patreon.com/politicsguys. If you've got questions, comments, corrections, or you just want to yell at me and Jay for being too conservative this week, you can always reach us at mail@politicsguys.com. We're also on Twitter @politicsguys. Now, the executive producers of Politics Guys are Bruce Johnson, Wilma Marino, Andra Masker, Daniel Toe, Chris Wilkinson, and Ryan Beasley. Today's show was produced by myself, Trey Orndorff. I hope you'll join us next.